Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am so excited to have you all here. My name's Michael Scanlon, host of the Street Smart Ventures podcast. I am so thrilled to be here with Ellen Coulston, an amazing advocate. Ellen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Michael. I'm happy to be here.
So, Ellen, I know we've known each other for, I'd say, about a year and a half, 2 years through, other collaborations. And I cannot wait for you all to hear more about Ellen and the great work she's doing. And you really just for, all you listeners, really the aim of our podcast is to really share stories, elevate voices, really helping people move forward on their journey that is life. And I hope, my goal for this podcast is to really have you walk away feeling inspired, feeling like you learn something, that you have a new perspective. And if anything ever inspires you or any questions or challenges, as always, I'm going to have my contact info and our guest info at the end of the podcast. So please drop me a line. And we're really all about having conversations, encouraging collaboration, and just making positive change. So after that intro, Ellen, I want to dive right in because I know our time together is going to fly right on by. I first want to offer you the chance just to briefly share with our audience a little bit about yourself, if you'd like to, before we go on to kind of the meat of our conversation.
Well, that sounds great. Well, I'm delighted to be here. And Michael, I have been a fan of yours since you first presented at the Delaware Transition Conference before COVID. So I had a contract position with the Delaware Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to assist them in putting together their conference. And the Connecticut Youth Empowered Youth were our keynote speakers. So you came down to Dover. And again, we shared the power of you got to see it to be it. So there were 5 of you who took the main stage. A lot of conferences don't have that they have the youth voice right and center. But I know even from my own journey where I was a self-advocate, but then when I attended these conferences, I learned that it wasn't just enough for me to be a self-advocate, but my job is really to build capacity in my children so that they can be self-advocates and be able to speak up for themselves, really creating persons with agency, persons with volition, setting goals, and then preparing how to get there. So it doesn't happen overnight. It just doesn't, go and happen. But I learned that at these conferences that I learned that I've got to not only build it in Chris and my other son, and then I had to step sideways and allow them opportunities to practice. So I went back to graduate school, unheard of because I was in my mid-50s, because both of my sons were getting traction in 2015. One son was taking 2 classes in college, which was really a big thing. And my other son was going through Project Search. And I noticed that they were both making it at their own pace, but they were making it. And the magic sauce was really self-determination that we learned at these transition conferences. So once I saw that, I just saw that it worked. And then I was like, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to learn the research behind it. And that's when I went back to George Washington University. They have a graduate program in secondary transition services. I was older than all of my professors, but boy, did I learn a lot of reading. It was so funny because I gained my freshman 15 at the age of 55, which is not a good time to gain your freshman 15, but I learned so much. And then that has just been pivotal for me to really do the work I do now, which is go out and support students and families and educators. I do guest lectures. I do presentations on specifically student-led IEP meetings. So that's a little about me.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And no, it's again, I'm just inspired again, just hearing you share that little bit about yourself. And that kind of leads me to really the first thing I want to dive in with you is, part of the work we do, and I think that all of us in this field believe in, is having those quality relationships, and the transforming power of relationships. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about part of our model, but I'd love to dive right in and ask you, really what makes a good ally and mentor? You, as part of your journey, your professional journey, has been in that ally capacity. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's interesting because it starts with presume competence. Presume competence. I've never heard that title or that expression until I went to a transition conference. And that was really pivotal for me, that I started shifting from seeing everything my sons couldn't do to seeing everything they could do and leveraging those strengths and stretching those abilities. So it all starts, for to be a good ally is first to presume competence. You also have to allow later on for dignity of risk, and I'll get into that later. But um, what was impactful for me when I went to those conferences and then learned at school, was the parent, but also the youth has to see what self-determination looks like in other youth. It's very difficult because it's abstract. We talk about the term, do you want to be self-determined? Do you want to be empowered? Well, yeah, but how do I get there? But it's easier when you see, like, you know it when you see it, that, wow, that student is really competent in knowing their strengths, knowing their goals, knowing what they need to be successful. So, and a good adult ally, in my opinion, is showing what is possible, what can be, partnering with them, building capacity, which is again teaching them the different 9 elements of self-determination, providing opportunities for them to practice and then come back and self-reflect. So, part also of being a good adult ally is, when I was the advocate for my son, I was the one leading the process. When you're an adult ally, you really step to the side and are next to the student, and you help prepare them, and you help, you question, what are you going to do? You just, um, you're of the mindset that they can presume competence, and then you always have their back. So it's tough because parents don't know this and educators don't know it. We say things like, you're going to have to do this and you should do this and you should. But when we build capacity in youth and we are good adult allies, we stop the "you should" statements and think about, "What do you think about this?" Or, "Could you think," or, "Could you do that?" Or, "What do you do?" Like, I stopped telling and I started asking, because the answer for every student's transition plan is right in front of us, and they know it better than themselves. But they've got to they need help on identifying what are their strengths, what are they good at, and then teasing those opportunities out, and then just highlighting little everyday occurrences where they could be practicing these important skills that they're going to use over their entire life. I'm a strong advocate for student-led IEP meetings because it's the safest place to practice being, um, amplifying your voice, amplifying, these are my strengths, and this is what I want to be. This is where I am. I need your help to get me there. Help me fill in these skills that are missing. So, instead of me pulling the student through the situation, I'm behind the student and then questioning along the way, like, what do you think?
Mm.
So, one example is a way to start off, because people get nervous, but our student-led parent-teacher conferences, um, which is usually students don't go, even though we talk about the student. Every piece of paper on the table is about the student. But I know with my son, how I used to prepare him was, well, what's going well in this class? What do you like? What's going on? What don't you like what is not going on? What are your suggestions on resolving it? And what do you think your teacher's seeing? So the first time we went to a parent teacher conference, my son was so mad at me. I'm the only one going, and and you make me do this and you're pushing me. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But listen, every teacher, we're going to give them a half a dozen donuts and we're going to get a dozen donuts. So yeah, I bribed my son. I'm terrible. I'm a terrible mother, but it worked. But it was interesting. We sat down and the teacher always held it. They were happy to see my son. And they're like, oh, you're here. This is good. And they were getting ready to do what they typically do. And the teacher held the chair for me. And I looked at Chris and he knew just sit down. And then he pulled out his piece of paper for each subject for that teacher and he started. So I am now at this point, the teacher's looking at me. I'm looking at my son because he's getting practice on leading. So it was great. It then became a dialogue between the learner and the teacher and me. I'm the support. So, and it's really practice for when they go into employment, when they're talking to
Mhm.
your supervisor. So
Oh, yeah.
all this stuff they could practice. So, and I'm sorry, I got long-winded, but why tell when you can ask? And that's my best advice when you're a mentor or an adult ally. So, so what do you think?
That's a beautiful story, Ellen. I remember you sharing that, in other meetings and events we've been at, and it's just really inspiring. And I love how you have broken it down and made it really approachable and easy. Because I think sometimes people out there or the system, and I'm not going to say everyone, but I think what I've seen in my 10 or so years in the advocacy, field has been almost this analysis paralysis of like, we can get so stuck in either the nitty gritty or just the inertia of like, what do we do next, when it's like those simple questions like what's working, what's not working, what do you want to do, what's, and just like you shared, Ellen, I think there's something really amazing about just getting back to basics and just having those honest conversations. And like you said, presume competence, you talked about showing, not telling, providing those opportunities. And I mean, even you talking about, those student-led IEPs, I'm personal example of where it didn't really work out that well for me, and that I wasn't in a place to really be an active participant in my own IEP meetings. So, but that's another time, another full-on conversation. But if we have time, we can talk more about that as a little bonus or something. But I think what you talked about, Ellen, kind of inspires me to do a little follow-up. Is you shared all these great qualities of allies and mentors, but what I think could be a really interesting next step, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is how can agencies, schools, and the system at large, how can they really integrate allies and mentors? I think, that I think may be a missing step is, we can have these conversations about what can make a good ally and mentor. How do we really make that integrated into those everyday lives for people, personally and professionally?
Well, I think that's a great question, Michael. I think because the law says at age 14, we start transition planning for youth with disabilities. But every other student without a disability starts that transition plan on day one when they walk into school. You walk into first grade thinking, I'm going to be a police officer, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a nurse, I'm going to, but when you have a diagnosis, that future's taken right off the table. It's unintentional consequences. No one means to do it, but it comes right off the table because after you receive a diagnosis for your child, you're like, oh my gosh, what does somebody do who has that? Like you just immediately think, oh my gosh. And if I could go back, I just we need to start, we give the diagnosis, but then say to the parent, this child has strengths and it's up to you and I to discover them. It's a lot of work, but we're in. Are you in? And then handshake and yes, let's get to it. So I would change that. With agencies like kindergarten, first grade, they don't see the impact of what they teach today. I think that has an impact on the person, the adult. And so I think it's got to be more of we and this is more of a coaching, getting ready for adulting, because we're all going to make it to 20, most of us. We're all part of that life journey, building capacity, having those high expectations that, yes, I'm expecting you to be something because the world needs your talent. Only you were born with this talent. I need your talent. So again, when we shift perspective and look at that mindset, I think even though the IEP, that's the formality of it, but there was so much work to be done prior to it, preparing students for it, building that capacity, developing that agency with students. I know Prietz is a great partnership with and collaboration. Um, it is a shift, because when students get older, it always feels like, okay, this happens through the transition coordinator. No, it happens on all of us. We all have a piece of the pie of helping the students to grow and prosper. Um, I mean, it's many hands makes light work. I just think sometimes, as you tagged it, Michael, the system wants to silo everybody's responsibilities, and would really love to share, like, a spread a big we across all that, because that's how it is with the student right in the center of our work.
Mhm.
So but everybody has a hand on somebody, like, and the more we give opportunities and exposures to students, how do they know if they're interested in something if we think they can't?
Mhm.
Again, that presumed competence comes forward. It always comes forward. I shared the thing with the dignity of risk with forgive me. I shared about the student led parent teacher conferences. So dignity of risk is also a term that I learned through these conferences about transition conferences, and I really didn't understand that. And I learned that my other son didn't have to be perfect in everything he did. But with my son with the disability, I'm like, oh, he's got to be perfect. And I don't want him to fail. And I don't want this to happen. But that's how we learn, by
Mhm.
the different challenges we have. And the job is really to keep students moving and go around the barrier. How do we do that and get around? So after student-led parent-teacher conferences, we would have Chris go and talk to teachers in the beginning of the year, and that was also a challenge with him, like, oh, again, you're pushing me, you're doing this. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I know. But he kept growing,
Mhm.
because my target was like, I'm not going to be there one day. He's got to be able to do
Mhm.
this. So, so dignity of risk, the first one didn't go too well. Teacher didn't know what we were doing. Chris had kind of got fumbled with his stuff, and he was just frustrated. But that perseverance, we went back at it again the next time. So that's just another way of utilizing everybody, teachers, agencies, everybody has a fit in either
Mhm.
practicing or role playing or helping to build that capacity, just offering. So it's
And I
not on one
think
person's shoulder.
absolutely, no, I agree 100%, Ellen. And I think, and I remember this was like a year ago. I was in like some meeting. I don't ask me what meeting it was, Ellen, but like, and I wasn't like angry when I said it. I actually was like a little like excited and passionate. But I remember being in this statewide meeting and just kind of blurting out, like, we all can help in some way. We all can do something. And that's what I'm taking from what you're sharing. I think sometimes, and I am sensitive that there's so much going on in the world right now that, I'm not like personally attacking anyone, but I think there can be this general malaise or attitude from some that I can see sometimes where, oh, it's either not in my job or just the disengagement of people. And how do we make that positive change? And I think and hearing you talk about your son, there's this legacy component, and just I find that really inspiring. And thinking back in my own life too is just our words, thoughts, actions make a huge difference, even if you can't see it. And I think going back to what you shared earlier, I've personally talked about when I present on supporting youth is we all don't know the impact. When I was really struggling, I had my brain injury at 4 years old. I needed so much support and care really from early childhood through my middle school and high school years, um, I've had words spoken over me that Micah will never live independently. He'll never be employed, never this, never that. I've shared photos of my own medical records, like inches high, of just how medical records can be. It's like everything that's wrong with you. So it's like those messages were absorbed over time. And I just had this belief, like, okay, like I'm in the middle of three, kids. And so I got to see my older sister, younger brother move forward in life. And it was, um, it just felt like I was this, kind of standing still, other people are going ahead. And so I relate, I guess, in a lot of ways. And why we can have such rich conversations, Ellen, is because you're talking to someone who gets it.
Yeah, you just don't know the impact you have on people. I mean, and it could be one line, it's one little story, but again, if you're never exposed to it, you just never know. But yours is a story of hope. And that, again, once you receive that diagnosis, hope comes right off the table. And what you just said to me, I consult with if Parent Information Center, or forgive me, if a PTI out of OSEP, Office of Special Education Programs, they have PTI family centers who help support parents with kids with disabilities, teach them to how to be effective communicators and self-advocates. So they put contracts out. So I did a contract for one of the local PTIs, and I was talking to my colleague about just my own son's story. And again, hope comes right off the table when you receive
Mm.
that diagnosis. And I said, but fast forward to where he is right now. I mean, and then her name is Samtra Devard. She coined it perfectly when she said, oh, so you talked about when you went from your never day, he'll never be able to do this, just like you did, to I never imagined day. And it is like I never imagined my child is doing what he's doing now, because that is not what they told us in the beginning. So again, because we relied on the strengths, we got the supports we needed. I became educated, he became educated. His trajectory started turning up this way, and he was going after the things he wanted to do. And that was a goal. And I would say, well, what do you think you're going to do? I think I'll do this. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, and again, it was just watching him come alive, because everything had been stagnant, because well, we'll see what happens. And I'm like, oh geez. So thanks for sharing that, because that triggered something with me.
Ellen, thank you so much for talking about that and sharing that. And I think I love that quote of from the never day to never imagine day. I think one thing I've shared in multiple presentations is the diagnosis is not the destiny. When you said once the diagnosis is there, hope leaves, I think, I've experienced that. And I think it took me a long, long time as a young adult. And I say this as someone who just turned 36. So I get like, um, you know,
Fountain of youth.
is, really, you know, within my diagnosis, it helped me, I think on one hand, it helped me understand what I was going through. So I think that was helpful in the sense of it did open the pathway to additional support, but it took me a long time to really see that in a beneficial way. And so I know that can be a very personal thing for people, is I know some people who really don't want to think in terms of any diagnosis and just live their life. And I'm all about whatever works for someone. So and I can respect that. But I also know, there can be just that personal journey, but I'm very passionate about whatever you have. Don't be weighed down by that. Don't let that be your whole identity if you don't want it to be. I think that's because to me, like, oh, I'm Michael and I have like XYZ diagnosis, and that's what I was for, so much of my life. And I think so many people are pigeonholed that way, and it's just so detrimental.
You needed the gift of time. Yeah, does it happen overnight? No. But again, it's exposure to others that have created or found self-determination or whatever, or found their voice. But it's the gift of time. But to not expose and have opportunities, I think, is that where we should never give up, or you give
Mhm.
everything but up. So
Mm. I'd love to ask you more about opportunity and dignity of risk. I'm going back to this in my head, Ellen, because I think it's so important. I think what I've seen, I think there's such a chance for even more growth for our young people and even allies is I think sometimes I think we can be scared of failing or maybe things going differently than we imagined. And do you have anything you'd want to share just about how whether you want to call it failure or maybe a different shift in the journey, I'd love to talk for another minute or two, just really about what that looks like, because I think that to me has been such an impactful part in my own life. And I think normalizing that humans are not perfect, life is not perfect. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so again, it was my mindset that I didn't want Chris to fail. My other son, he tried things and it didn't always work out, but then it was an opportunity for him, had that exposure, you would do something different. I wasn't giving my other son the same opportunity, and that was on me. And then I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm a bigger barrier than the disability." So that's when, as an adult ally, I know again, I had to shift that. Let him try it. Let him try it the way he wants to try it. I don't want him to hurt himself, but let him learn. Let him think. So, sometimes we prepared when he was going to talk to the teacher. Sometimes it goes, I got it. I'll do it on my own, and it didn't work out as well.
Mm,
So we always did. I try to do that self-reflection afterwards. What went well? What would you do differently? Would you do preparation different? Everything takes time. So again, but we had to I explicitly, went over areas. What do you think this might happen or this might not happen or whatever? Just tried as much to prepare him, because again, I'm thinking long range down the road. He's going to go to college. He's going to be able to talk to one of his teachers, and that happened. He went to the community college, he took the test, and he was placed between two classes. So they had a meeting with him, with the division head and disability support services. And he goes, "This is what I decided to do." And I talked to, and I'm like, "Oh my God, when is this meeting?" He goes, "Oh, I had it today. It's all right. It's taken care of. This is what I'm going to take." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." But he did it. He
wow.
did it. So, and that's really hard if we do for the student all in high school, because when you get to college, there's no magical switch that I'm going to do it for myself. That was like one of the self advocates I worked with self-determination. Oh my God, he taught me so much. But he always would say, "Don't do it for me, show me how."
Mm,
And I never did it. And did it take time? Yes. But did it pay dividends? Absolutely, for him and for me. So I thought it was so insightful. The more you expose and teach students this, it pays 20-fold of what you put into it.
mm,
So
mm. Wow. You've talked, I want to follow up on a couple of great things you just mentioned, Ellen. One, I think you mentioned preparation and reflection. I think those go such a long way. We've talked about that. I've heard you mention that a few times on this recording. And I just want to let our audience know those what can seem really easy or simple are huge. Because I gotta tell you, Ellen, I can't remember in my school years and young adult years, I can't recall many, if any, professionals and adults really having a systematic, comfortable way to prepare me and then debrief and reflect, So I think I just want to make a note from my own experience that would have been so, so helpful. It could be applicable to really anything, right, Ellen? It could be like in school before any meeting, before any test, in your work life, in your personal life. I mean, I just think these are just really foundational, basic, but impactful ways to really help people succeed. And I just want to make a note for you to recognize how cool that is and just and what did that take you, Ellen? What? Half hour of your time and an honest conversation. I don't know, it could be longer, right? But I'm just trying to say it took some time, I'm sure. And what I guess my follow-up, I'm rambling a minute, but I mean, was that like an easy habit for you to start? Like, what was that like for you to really shift into really operating and doing that, naturally.
Right. So my son can't sit still. So we would always do it on a walk and I would start a conversation. What do you think about this? Or this is coming up. And what do you think? And then I would just take notes in my head, what he would say, and I would write it down. Um, Part of planning is executive functioning, which is stuff that we need. The executive functioning skills are part of what you need for adulting. So he knew that everything took time. I would say, how long is that going to take? How long is that going to take? Sometimes his estimates were good. Sometimes his estimates were not good because he's new to it. Because I was always doing stuff for him and I was always doing stuff. So, and then the other thing with the preparation, this is what this looks like when you're ready. So, but that was all things. Did I sit with my son like for a half hour at a time? He just couldn't sit that long. Um, a piece here, piece there, and then piece it together. He really bought in though once he had success.
Mhm.
And then once he thought like, oh, I'll do this again, or I'll do this. Like it was, so went to an IEP meeting and I helped organize, there's a tool, I don't know if this will turn up or not, but it's from Determine and it's a one pager and on it is your spin and it's your strengths, your preference, your inference and needs. So I would go down this with my son and I'm like, well, what are your strengths? And we don't talk to our kids about our strengths, especially in IEP meetings. I can't do this. I can't do this. Got to do this stuff. So um, he had a hard time filling it out. I would add things. I'm like, well, you're really good at this. And then when we're at the nursing home visiting Aunt Lena, you're good at this. They really like you. So again, I'm molding his mindset on what he can do. So then we put it on the refrigerator. And then when something happened, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is another strength of yours, or this is a preference. You really don't like to sit down at the desk for a long time. You've got to move around. That's a preference. So again, it's building, building, building. But I integrated this within the IEP meeting. So the first one was in 7th grade, and we had each of these on a slide. So your strengths, your preference, your inference, your needs. Didn't have words because that's kryptonite for my son. We had pictures, so he could talk about the pictures. My strength, I'm really good at bowling. I really like this, or I'm really good at math. I really, because the rules don't change. So again, it was just giving him those opportunities to practice saying, this spin is really your brand.
Mm.
And we don't do that with kids with disabilities because you've got this, but it's just not correct. So but we went to the meeting and the speech therapist was saying like he's kind of itchy at this point and then he goes, well, when you take me out of math, I'm really anxious what I'm missing. So the math teacher's like, I have this calendar with all these assignments that I do every day. I'm going to cover this, this, this on the pages. If I gave you this calendar and you go to speech, if you do the homework and stuff, you have questions coming the next day, but would that be helpful? So he was thrilled he goes, yeah, that'd be helpful. And so again, here it is, practice for the employer. Here's the this is him talking to the teacher. This was a real life problem. Now we could we have solved it that way if he wasn't there? I don't think so, because we didn't have his perspective. So the meeting finished, we left. I'm dying. I'm dying. So I said, well, how do you think the meeting went? And that's when he said, like, he goes, I think it was really good. And I said, yeah, I think it was good too. And he goes, it was a good thing I was there because I had all the answers. He was in 7th grade. He got it.
Wow.
So from there, I could just just keep stretching along, stretching along. So it didn't cost money. Yeah, it was some time, it was conversation. If I wasn't exposed to it though, at transition conference, and every state has them, if I wasn't exposed to other self-determined self-advocates, of any disability, when you hear somebody get up and talk about what their strengths are, what their goals are, yeah, these are my challenges, and this is how I go around my challenges, I wouldn't be here, and my son would not be where he is right now. That was so important to see people like you, Michael, seeing it and being it.
No. I'm just taking a moment. You've again I just love talking with you, Ellen. What can I say? I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. So it's such a pleasure to hear your experiences and perspective. And I know you've talked about this, I mean, just now and really through our whole conversation, but I would be remiss if I didn't give you the formal question, our next question. Really, is there anything else you want to share about the impact you've had on supporting your son and what really being an ally and mentor has meant to you and helped you with personally and professionally?
Yeah, I just don't know why we don't do this with every student. The past contract I had with the PTI in Delaware, it was bringing self-determination to youth with disabilities, and we had a conference. We had a keynote speaker, and then we divided the rest of the conference for the parent strand and the youth strand, learning the same things, but the impact on the youth after only being exposed to like 4 hours of self-determination, you know, when we separated, some of the youth were like really like nervous and they didn't want to leave their parents' side. And it was like, no, no, you'll be okay. And parent moving them on. After lunch, they all ran back into the room because they loved what they did.
Mm.
At the end of the conference, we brought the youth back. We're getting ready closing. They're up on stage and then they're sharing the impact of learning self-advocacy and self-determination and how they're going to bring it forward to further develop it in themselves and others. So, and that was 4 hours. Can you imagine? The parents left changed, and then the students left empowered. So I just think we should be doing this earlier. School districts can do this. They can bring in agencies who work with youth with disabilities and how they build self-advocacy skills in those students. And it's that art of storytelling, which is again really important because that's what you do when you go to employment. You tell your story, why you're good for the job. So
Wow.
and education, the end goal of education is employment. So
Mhm.
this all ties together. As you talked about the interagency collaboration, we all have a piece of the puzzle. So we're part of that journey.
No, I agree 100%, Ellen. And I was chuckling in my inside my head when you said, "Oh, there were some youth who didn't want to leave their parents' side." That was me. So so I was yeah, would have been a young adult who would have been nervous, but you know what? But again, I can tell you, just like you're sharing from your parent perspective, I remember my own mother, pushing me along, helping me, asking me, and just giving me those opportunities and balancing, I think, her care and duty as my mother, knowing she can see the long term with giving me the agency along the way to make those choices. So 100% agree. Um,
Your mom sounds awesome.
I do want to ask you, this is a really fun question. I do love this one. If you had a magic wand, what changes would you make to help young people thrive?
It's like you hit it in the beginning with this system. We got to have, instead of just like transition planning starts at 14 with youth with disabilities, we need a continuum. It starts on day one. Everybody walks into that school building and they are going to be something, and the expectation is, yeah, we need their talent and abilities. That really needs some work.
Mm. I agree. And I think, we're in the year 2025. I almost said 2024. I know we're early in the new year now, Ellen, but I think it's such a beautiful thing, right? To tell someone, we need you, we need your talent, we need your uniqueness. I think there could be such societal pressure to conform, to feel like, oh, I will only be successful if I'm a certain way or I do a certain job. And that's why I'm so passionate about really helping people move forward and finding creative ways that you can have an amazing life your own way. And I think you believe that, I believe that. So many of my colleagues believe that. And so I think I'm on a mission to help people live life their way successfully.
Amen.
And I know I didn't ask this in our preparation email, Ellen, but I'm gonna do the same spin I did in our last recording we had. Is there anything you want to ask me? Anything we're, on our last bit of time together? Any random question? Any thoughts you want to ask me? I'm, have an open book for this recording.
All right, Michael Scanlon, how would your life be more enriched if you had seen a Michael Scanlon in middle school?
Oh, I love this question. Honestly, I feel like I would have saved myself a lot of grief and heartache. I think I felt so alone. And I think, like I shared, middle school was really the start of my own mental health challenges, and just really, right, being a teenager is just hard for anyone, right? So I just need to like make that blanket statement. But I think that was just such a time where I felt like I was so different, so unworthy, like
Mm.
life was a challenge, like even like leaving my house, felt terrifying, like leaving my bedroom, like, was afraid of what other students would like say to me, look at me, like was afraid of like everything. I was afraid of like getting a wrong answer. I was afraid of like making eye contact. I was, just not sure like who I was or where I was in the world. And so I think if I had had someone model for me like you're okay just as you are, and having those experiences and opportunities to really like ask questions, have someone model for me what it's like, and that I'm unique, we're all unique, and I just think there was just I would have just saved me so much heartache and grief. And I as I say this to you, Ellen, and for our listeners, I know I'm not alone in this. I think this is like a human wide problem of people. All of us can really maybe at times struggle with who they are or where they fit in the world, but I truly think just people having honest conversations and standing up is like, no, 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 like I know who I am, I know what I want, I know I'm good enough, I know, in some way I'm here for a reason. And it's funny, remember my dad where like you could have really cool car ride chats, Ellen, like there's something about transportation, like I may not know what to tell someone if I'm like sitting at a table, but something about being in a car or a bus or something like gets me thinking, or those like life moment chats. Remember, like years ago, my dad, we were like in a car parked for a minute. He's like, you know what, Michael? You know, I know, your childhood was tough with your brain injury, but like look how you've turned your life into like with that purpose and just making a difference. And so, because for a while, Ellen, you know, I was like, oh, I wish I never, had the brain injury. Like, why am I struggling? Like, what would it have been different if I like went back in time, and just to be normal, to be different. And so it's it's a and I would never ask that now. Like if I had a magic wand, you got 14-year-old me would have said, oh, I want to go back in time. I don't want to have the accident. I don't want to be different. I don't want to have, I want to be like every other kid, but I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be who I am from part of my experience. So um, yeah, that's my answer for you.
Yeah, because you have an exceptional story that goes out and has impact on families and youth because, as you said, we put hope right back on the table. If I can do it, you can too. This is how I did it. My story may not be exact, but I kept moving. I can do it. So it's not without work. It's a ton of work, but man, does it pay dividends? Because look where you are right now.
Oh,
So
thank you. And the same for you, Ellen. I think that's what I want our audience to, and please back me up, Ellen, is I think it's so easy for us to come on here for this podcast recording. And I want everyone who listens to understand, we are the products of our own experiences and investing in ourselves, our lives, our family, our friends. So you and I have had, I'm sure, lots of shared tears, frustration, anger, just all the hard emotions, because like we're like it's kind of like social media. When people post all like the fun stuff, oh look at me, I'm on my like 10th vacation around the world to Italy, and I'm here like what, like I'm in winter in New England, like dying over here, no sunlight. But we don't know, is that the full story? No. So there's so much work behind the scenes and just life that I just want to have everyone who's listening understand. You've heard from Ellen, you've heard a little bit more about myself. You can do it. Help is available, support's available. Please, you don't have to do this alone. Reach out. We're going to make sure when these podcasts are live, we're going to make sure there's resources, you have information. So anything you want to add on to that, Ellen?
Be authentically you is perfect.
And on that note, I think that's a perfect place to end this recording. Again, Ellen, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure. And I'm going to make sure when this podcast is live, everyone will have your contact information so they can reach out to you if they ever want to, again, work with you more or get to know you or any questions. I just love to make sure you are elevated as well through this project.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. We'll keep partnering.
Absolutely. And on that note, thank you everyone for listening. It's been such a pleasure. And until next time, take care, everyone.